Joining us now for more reaction on this decision is Andrew Lieb, constitutional attorney at Lieb at Law. Thank you so much for joining us and good to see you again, Andrew. So what is your initial reaction to this situation, especially as our correspondent really reiterated that this was more so a judgment on the standing of the case, not necessarily the actual meat of it? What is your initial reaction?
I think you just said it correct. And standing is a threshold issue, meaning can the court get to the substance of the case? And Judge Amy Coney Barrett ruled for the court in a 6-3, which is pretty decisive. And for a conservative like Barrett to rule for the Biden administration tells you something. And I want to read you a line from it because I think this really tells the tale. And here's what Amy Coney Barrett wrote. As discussed, the platforms began to suppress the plaintiff's COVID-19 content, and here's the key word, before the defendants, and that's talking about the Biden administration, challenged communications started, which complicates the plaintiff's efforts to demonstrate that each platform acted due to government coerced enforcement of its policies. So what's this case about? Jawboning. Can the government coerce from a position of power, and does that implicate the First Amendment? Because you know the First Amendment, it says, hey, we can't restrict speech. So who's this a win for? This is a win to say that when the government is crossing the line into interfering with speech. And what we learned from this case is if the government influences, but they're not the causal actor, not the reason that social media companies did something, then it's okay for the government to exert influence. So this is a win for our government to be able to say, hey, we can exert influence as long as we didn't cause the change in the content moderation. And I need to add to that, what we know is that there's only been 2 cases today. I know we've been talking about that. The other one talks about when it's a crime to accept gratuities for past act for local and state governments. And they say about bribes and everything else, but we know we only have 2 cases today. This social media case is a huge one because it tells us when someone can stop the government from influencing content moderation.
So in other words, to put it in plain speak, the Supreme Court basically saying it's okay for the feds to try and influence, but they can't outright cause it or order it in terms of content. Is that fair in terms of a layman's description?
You speak my language perfectly, exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Unless they cause it, they're saying, here's what they said. The Fifth Circuit convoluted all these influences and they said, hey, the government did bad stuff. But unless you can show the government is the causal factor, and unless they did it, then they're not doing nothing. They're just influencing. They're saying their opinion. They're allowed to say their opinion. They just can't cause how social media companies operate and do content moderation. And that's what we learned today. And unless you have that, the government and the federal courts will not hear your case.
Our correspondent Liz Lander said that not only is it a win for the Biden administration, but it seems to be a win as well for the social media companies because it still remains up to them to moderate that type of misinformation and disinformation. Is that in itself a slippery slope where we're leaving it to social media companies to monitor themselves and to not necessarily enforce, I guess, barricades for mis and disinformation?
Well, that's a 2-part question. Let's start off with the first part. What the case is saying is the social media companies always did moderate. It's not saying they left it to themselves. It's saying they always were the final arbiter and it wasn't the government. Now, to the second part of your question, that depends if you're a First Amendment person. If you believe in the First Amendment, you believe the government shouldn't be dictating speech. You believe private actors should be able to do their own speech. You, me, like Scripps News, like social media companies. This is a win for all private actors in saying, hey, as long as we have the final say, the government can't do anything. Now, is it also a loss? Yeah, because it's saying the Biden administration can influence to some extent. So what we've learned is that some influence is potentially okay, so long as that influence doesn't change what's happening. We got a test. We got a clear line here. The clear line is the influence would have to change what happens for us to have standing to sue the government for violating First Amendment. So I think it's a win for society. Now, to your fundamental macro question, should we have social media companies regulated? Should we determine if that's governmental speech? I think that's a question for Congress, and maybe that's something they should tackle, because as we see all sorts of conspiracies go on social media. But for now, are we wanting the government, that invisible hand, to be dictating what we're seeing and learning? No, what we learned is the free market does that, and social media companies, as well as regular traditional media companies like Script News. We get to decide what's out there because that's the way a free market works in a capitalist society.
And last question, bigger picture before we let you go. Obviously, this docket is full for the Supremes this term, and everyone's waiting for the abortion case, everyone's waiting for the immunity case. There are a lot of things here left on the docket. They seem to be going real slow. Behind the scenes, in terms of the way the court works, is that because some of these opinions are still being tweaked or worked on or edited? Are they waiting for political considerations like
a weekend, even.
You know, it's a Friday, so people pay less attention, or the debate is Thursday night? Because we still have a ways to go here. I know it's just Wednesday, but I thought we'd get a little more today than 2 of the 10 big ones they have left. Are you sensing any strategy here at all, or this is just the court doing what it feels like doing?
I'd like to say the latter, that's the court doing what it feels like doing, because that's just their tweaking decisions and everything else. But I know that Justice Roberts is very interested in the legitimacy of the court. And you would know that it would be a major disaster if today or tomorrow, and who knows what happens, if we do the immunity right before the debate. So who knows, but maybe they'll drop that tomorrow. You got to stay tuned.
That would be something, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Yeah.
It's an incredible week. The primaries, the court, the debate, a lot going on.
Yeah.
Andrew, I always love talking to you. Thanks for giving us some time. I'm sure we'll be seeing you again multiple times before the end of this week. Standing invitation to come back, depending on what the court does. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
More news coming up after this quick break.